this is one of the things that I love about sports is that sports have a great way of mirroring life. There's a lot of emotions around sports. People can feel the excitement. They can feel that adrenaline. They can get pumped up about their team. You get this strange phenomena that happened to me, and I'll back up a little bit. 10 years ago, I came out to Kansas City in October. I'd never been here. My wife and I were considering relocating to this area. And we were sitting in a hotel room, and the news was on, and the sports cast came on. I don't know why I remember this, but I think I remembered it just for this morning, actually. And the newscasters come on, well, the Royals have lost their 100-and-something game this year, and let's hope for better next year. And I was like, man, I don't really remember the Royals being that bad, but they were pretty bad 10 years ago. And so for the next 8 years following the Royals, they were bad. I don't even think they had a winning record. And all the while, my wife could care less. I mean, she's just somebody who, if sports is on the television, she's in the other room, or she could care less. And but all of a sudden last year, out of my wife emerged this crazy closet Royal fan. And and I'm like, do I know you? And to the point where she's throwing things at the television, screaming at the announcers because she thinks they're mentioning, and I can't even mention his name in our house, Madison Bumgarner, without her curling into a position of just disgust. And just for those who don't know, he was the pitcher for the San Francisco Giants who beat the Royals last year in the World Series. And but anyway, it was funny to see this person who could care less for 8 years, that would never thought twice, never wanted to go to a game. I don't want to go to a game. That's stupid. I don't want to do that. But now it's like she's got a royal garb on, and she's got to watch the television, and no one can walk in front of the TV set almost without her pitching a fit. So it's funny how sports can do these things to us, or that we let sports do these things to us is probably the more accurate way of putting it. But it does mirror life. I mean, sports, they do give us those opportunities to feel emotion and get connected to something. One of my favorite sports stories of all time, and I like to share this because it's really a story about faith. It's about the faith in one individual had in himself when the whole world around him was telling him, you're mediocre, you're washed up, you're done, you're not going to do anything great anymore. And you're done. Maybe we've heard that in our life. You feel like you're sort of past your prime, and you're getting to that place where you just don't think you really have a lot more to contribute. Well, this is where a gentleman by the name of Howard Emeke found himself in 1929. He was a journeyman pitcher throughout his career. You'll never see him in the Hall of Fame. He won exactly 166 games throughout his career, and he lost 166 games. He wasn't necessarily an overpowering pitcher, but he was a survivor. He was somebody who could just be good enough to be on a team. And they used him a lot in spots when the pitching staff was a little tired. He found himself on the 29 Philadelphia Athletics, which by history's account is one of the most underrated teams of baseball history. It was a team that was loaded with Hall of Famers. And this team found themselves going to the pennant really early. They knew they were going to be heading to the World Series, but they were going to be facing the Chicago Cubs in the World Series. And the manager of the Athletics at that time said, I just think I need a stronger bat in the lineup. I'm going to, when I set my postseason roster, I'm going to let Howard go. He really is just not contributing enough to the team. So he calls Howard into his office, and he says, Howard, we're going to be facing the Cubs, and boy, they've got a lot of really heavy bats over there on their team. We're just going to need a little bit more firepower. So I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to let you go from the team, and we're going to bring in another hitter in your place. And for a guy who had never played in the World Series to that point, a guy whose career he knew was over. He looked at Connie Mack and he said, "Connie," and he laid his arm across his desk and he says, "I have one good game left in this arm. Give me a chance." So there was something in him at that moment that conveyed that faith that he had in himself, that he knew deep down that there was something greater that he had to give. The world didn't know it. They saw a pitcher that was mediocre. They saw a guy at the end of his career that they knew that it was his last year. But he knew different. He had a feeling inside that he was greater than what anybody else was saying about him. So Connie considered his offer and he said, "I tell you what, we've already won the pennant. We're going to go to the World Series. We know we're going to meet the Cubs. I'm going to release you from the team, and I want you to go scout the Cubs for the next 3 weeks. I want you to tell me how they're pitching to Hack Wilson. I want you to tell me what they swing at. I want to know what their weaknesses are. Come back, and I'll give you your chance." So there was a lot of hubbub. The first game of the World Series that year was being played in Chicago's Wrigley Field. On the pitching staff for the A's, you had a Hall of Famer, Lefty Grove. You had another pitcher, George Earnshaw, who had won 24 games that year. And you had this journeyman pitcher who was last on the staff that had only won 7 games. And so all of the confusion and concern was when they saw Howard in the bullpen warming up to pitch game 1. And they thought, what's wrong with Connie? Has he lost his mind? We got an all-star, we got 3 all-star pitchers on our team, and he's running this lunatic out there to face this great Cubs lineup. Well, when the dust settled that day, Howard Emke had set a World Series record for strikeouts. And he won the game. And to his prophecy, he never won another one. He retired the next year without ever winning a next game, or without ever winning a game the following season. And that ended up being his very last win. And that record that he set in the World Series stood for 23 years, until 1952, I think it was. He had an interesting post-career. He went on to be the guy who created the tarps that we pull over the field. So we have seen the results of his work, but probably never knew who that was. Howard Emke. And strangely enough, I think it was actually on this date in history that he pitched that game. I could be wrong, but I think it was early October. But that story of faith, these are the kinds of things that sports give to us. They give us these feelings and these stories that we can relate to. We may not like baseball. What's he telling a baseball story for? But we can certainly relate to the human triumph of people not believing in us and overcoming, smashing the odds, which I was sure as heck hoping that K-State would have done yesterday, but that's another story. The end of the game was pretty painful. But there's an interesting psychology. Why are we fans? Why all of a sudden were people just out of their mind going royal crazy? Let's go Royals. Boop, 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 boop. Why do we do this? What's the psychology that we're living in? What is the spiritual significance of being a fan? And all of us in this room are fans of something. Who likes Dancing with the Stars? Okay. It may not be sports. I can't stand sports. You're a fan of something. You're maybe a fan of your grandkids, or you're maybe a fan of a TV show of something. But we're all fans of something. Why is that? We have a connection to something. There's an emotional connection that's something outside of ourselves, that's bigger than ourselves, that allows us to have that emotional payoff. There was a gentleman by the name of Christian End. He was an associate professor at Xavier University. And he says, there is a universal need to belong. It is almost to the point, if you are not identifying with a team or with something, that people look at you like, what's up with you? What's wrong with you? We could all say maybe that we're fans of unity. We're all here in this community to be together, to share this ideas or these thoughts together here today. We're fans of this movement. There's a dubious story that I'll share with you that I actually witnessed of another baseball fan that, what happens if you are that guy who does something that takes away from your team or does something to detract from the causes that you have. And there was a very sad story that happened in 2003. I happened to be in Key West at this time. My wife and I had taken a weekend to go down there, and the Cubs happened to be in the World Series. It seems to be a Cubs day today. But the Cubs happened to be in the postseason, and there was a foul ball that went down the left field line. And as the player went to catch the foul ball, a fan reached out and tried to catch the ball. This guy's name was Steve Bartman. And Steve Bartman interfered with the play, and it cost the Cubs the out. The other team ended up rallying for runs in that inning, and they never looked back. They ended up going on to the World Series instead of the Cubs. And a lot of people sort of pointed to that moment as the domino effect. That's where it all happened. It all started with that guy. He was the guy who ruined it for everybody. So much so that he had to be escorted from the stadium. And as he's being escorted from the stadium, people are throwing beer on him. People are throwing cans at him. People are yelling at him, screaming at him, calling him names. Even to the point where the governor of the state, after the game, weighed in and said, I hope that guy never needs a pardon from me. He should seriously consider getting into the witness protection program. This is from the governor of the state. A funny sideline to that was the other governor from Florida, Jeb Bush at the time, offered him asylum. He didn't take it, but anyway. But this was the sad state. Basically what has happened here is that all of a sudden somebody or something comes into our world and they challenge what we believe in. They're coming into, and we get it all the time here in Unity. I've heard anything in my life about Unity. I had a cousin said, why do you go to Unity? They worship rocks. I'm like, what? Are you crazy? So people have misconceptions about what we think or what we believe. And then we become guarded. We become defensive. People can become very extreme in their fans being a fanatic of different things. Why is that? The simple answer is that people have a need. Even the people outside of us, they have a need to want to belong. So if you're not part of them, you're challenging their thought process. Why don't you believe that Jesus was the Son of God, that he rose from the dead on the third day? Well, we do believe that. We happen to believe it in a different way than you might interpret it, not in the literal interpretation, but in the metaphysical interpretation. But we challenge the status quo. Unity is one of those, quote, new thought religions that sort of go against the norm. We challenge the fans of the norm. And we're a growing sect of thought. And this challenges the status quo. We've heard it said 1,000 times that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. This life and this spiritual experience, whether it be through baseball, whether it be through religion, whether it be through our jobs, it's our sandbox for growth. We are here on this earth to grow. We are here on this earth to grow in our spiritual awareness. This physical world is necessary for us to have that spiritual growth. Interacting with others is how we grow, for good or bad. Isolation is scary. And yet we're quick to ostracize someone who may not have the same ideas or share the same things. And I had this thought. One of the most beautiful things I ever saw in my life was a guy sitting on the street corner. And he had a sign, homeless. Please help. We'll work for money. We'll work for food or whatever. Why is that beautiful? Because every human being that drove by him looked the other way. They did not want to acknowledge him. He wasn't part of them. He was outside of their experience. But at his feet, he had this mutt of a dog who was jumping up on him, licking him in the face and loving him, wagging his tail with pure, unconditional love. And as I sat there at the traffic light looking at this guy thinking, that is just beautiful. That is truly unconditional love. We've got all this stuff going on up here that tells me that I'm separated from him. But I'm not. And a dog showed me that. A dog that was licking his face, happy to be in his company. Wasn't looking at anybody else, totally devoted to his owner. I don't know what issues the guy had, but he's my brother. That dog taught me how to love him that day. Just be who he was supposed to be. We're all part of the same family. I thought if somebody came in here reeking of alcohol and dirty clothes, how would we treat them? How would we treat somebody who doesn't quite fit in where we're at work? They're not part of our team. If I went to a Royals game wearing an Astros uniform, I'd probably have things thrown at me or jeered. What team do we belong to? Same thing if a man was standing in the middle of Kansas City waving an Iranian flag, singing praises to Allah, how long do you think it would take people to comment? Can we look past this human experience to the true nature of our spiritual connectedness? Or are we caught up in our clannish mentality? What it means to be on our team and not your team. There's a separation here. This happens not only in today's world, but one of the comparisons I drew was the church in Corinth, who Paul had set up a church in Corinth, and as he continued on his missionary journey, he had left a gentleman by the name of Apollo to be the said leader of this church. And so there were some confusions as it was to be a Christian. What did it mean to be a Christian? That was the whole purpose of the letter of the Corinthians to the church in Corinth. And I'll paraphrase some of the writing from 1 Corinthians chapter 3. When Paul writes them and he says, "Do not deceive yourself. If any of you think you are wise by the standards of this age, you should become fools to become wise again. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness in God's sight. As it is written, He catches the wise in their craftiness. And again, the Lord knows that the thoughts of the wise are futile. So then, no more boasting about human leaders. All these things are yours, whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas, or the world of life or death, or the present or the future. All are yours, and you are of Christ, and Christ is of God. The team that we belong to is the team of being the Christ, the best idea. The metaphysical words for Christ is the perfect idea of God for man. Think about that right now for yourself. How many times do we look in the mirror and maybe comment on how our hair looks, or how our skin is wrinkled, or maybe if we should gain or lose some weight? Do any of you look in the mirror in the morning and say, I'm the perfect idea of God for man? Do we do that? Am I a perfect idea of God for man? Here Paul says that's what you are. You are of Christ, and Christ is of God. God the absolute. You are of the perfect idea of the absolute. The great unlimited. That's the team that you belong to. That's the cloak that we wear as spiritual beings having a human experience. But we're so caught up sometimes in our fervor, in what we believe in, and how we see ourselves in this human form, whether I'm a Royals fan or whether I'm an Astros fan, and whether you're not. But we forget the truth that we are the perfect idea of God. We are the perfect idea of the absolute, the great unlimited. So I'm asking you, as in conclusion to this, what are you a fan of? What are you serious about? Do you feel the divine connection by coming together on Sundays? Can you appreciate your spiritual connection to God and others? Can you see yourselves as interconnected? Can we use our connection to be more kind and loving and accepting of others despite our human condition? Is that the team that we want to join? Paul is calling us to be a part of something greater than ourselves, to be a part of a spiritual community that transcends our limited human understanding. Jesus, in his life's examples, didn't see himself as a part of this world, and he encouraged his followers not to get caught up in the things of this world. Don't get caught up in your own human nature, but let your spiritual nature be your true essence. Lean on that. Be a fan of that. This is fun. This can be fun, but it can also be very divisive if we don't watch those lines that we draw in the sand, because it sometimes climbs off of the field and into our real life, and we find ourselves very divisive. The property lines with our neighbors. I had a house in Florida. I moved in, and the very first thing the neighbor did next door to me was she said, I just want you to know that I know that the building on the back of your property is 6 inches over onto my line, but it's okay. Okay. Thank you. I don't have to move it. Thank you. That's good. But we get so caught up in this. What's 6 inches? 6 inches she doesn't have to mow. So let's take this forward, this idea together. When we get caught up in the fervor of something and we get caught up in our ideas of what we're fans of, let's remember our true team. Let's remember the cloak of Christ. Let's remember living as spiritual beings, one with one another. God bless you. All right.